The year is 2030. Imagine you are the supreme commander of a powerful nation, a country with ambitions unrivaled in history, a nation with the weapons, the soldiers, and the political will to change the world order. You have built an army the size of which has never been seen before. You have invested in industrial might that rivals the greatest empires of the past. And now, you have just issued an order that will echo through the ages. You have ordered your forces to invade the United States of America. For a moment, hold on to that image. Let it sink in. Because what you're about to face is not something you learned in war school. It's not contained in strategy manuals, and it's not something any map can adequately prepare you for. What you think you know, what you believe you understand about war, logistics, geography, and human conflict, is about to be challenged in every conceivable way. Let's begin by setting the stage. Let's reshape this scenario in your mind. In this thought experiment, you're not worried about the United States Navy, nor about its Air Force, nor about its missiles, nor about any of its advanced weaponry. For the sake of this scenario, imagine that the entire U.S. military has magically vanished. Vanished like smoke in the wind. Poof. Gone. No aircraft carriers, no drones in the sky, no nuclear submarines, no Marines standing at ready. The mightiest defense apparatus ever constructed simply does not exist in this scenario. What remains, however, is far more important, because what remains is the land itself, the people who inhabit it, and the sprawling infrastructure that weaves the nation together. You might think that this makes your task easier, that without the U.S. military, this might be a walk in the park, that you will casually place your flag on the White House lawn within a month and proclaim victory. But let me tell you something, nothing could be further from the truth. What you're about to walk into, as commander-in-chief of this invading force, is a logistical nightmare the likes of which humanity has never seen. A series of trials designed not by generals, but by nature itself, by geography, by the unpredictable cruelty of weather, and by the raw will of the people who call this land home. Imagine for a moment that you're standing on the deck of your flagship, somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The sky is vast, the water stretches endlessly in every direction, and your goal, hidden somewhere beyond the horizon, is the American West Coast. The ocean before you is not simply a stretch of water. It is a moat of unimaginable scale, a wall of blue that seems serene when distant, but becomes a merciless gauntlet when faced head-on. To reach the East Coast from Europe, your fleet would have to cross roughly 3,000 to 4,000 miles of open ocean. To reach the West Coast from Asia, you face nearly 6,000 to 7,000 miles of nothing but water. Try to imagine those distances. Imagine how colossal they are. Imagine the logistics of moving hundreds of thousands of troops across them, along with their tanks, their ammunition, their medical supplies, their fuel, their food, and all the equipment necessary to sustain a modern army. In World War II, the Allies prepared for the invasion of Normandy by crossing the English Channel, a body of water that, in most places, is no more than a few dozen miles wide. The planning for that operation, known as Operation Overlord, took years, millions of tons of supplies, and the total industrial output of several superpowers. The English Channel, in places hundreds of times narrower than the Pacific Ocean, was still enough to require the construction of artificial harbors, to necessitate the stockpiling of every ship available, and to absorb the attention of the world for months. Now imagine that on a scale 100 times larger, and you begin to grasp the challenge. Let's say, conservatively, that you want to land 500,000 troops on American soil, a modest number for occupying a nation of 330 million people, spread over nearly 4 million square miles of land. You do not just need to get those troops there, you need to support them with food, water, fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and everything that makes modern military forces capable of sustained operations. Modern armored divisions burn hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel every single day. If you are crossing oceans, that fuel must either be carried with your forces or supplied along the way, exponentially increasing the weight and size of your logistical tail. And here is where the irony begins to reveal itself. The United States has almost no viable staging grounds close enough to make this easier. In most historical invasions, armies build up their forces just across the border, in a neighboring country that can serve as a launch pad. The Germans used France to reach Britain, the Allies used Britain to reach Germany, the United States used Saudi Arabia and other bases to launch operations in the Middle East. But who do you use to reach the U.S.? Hawaii is closer, but still roughly 2,500 miles from the West Coast. That is like staging in London to invade Iraq. It helps only a little and not enough. As your ships gather in transit, visible from space due to the sheer volume of metal and machinery, there will be no hidden buildup, no element of surprise. By the time your first transport approaches the exclusive economic zone of the United States, your troops will have been at sea for weeks, confined in tight quarters, seasick, weak from lack of fresh food, and already beginning to suffer from muscle atrophy. And when they finally reach land, it will not be a friendly reception. For the U.S. coastline is not a welcoming beach. It is a series of natural obstacles designed by nature itself with no concern for military planners. The West Coast is largely a jagged line of cliffs, treacherous currents, and inhospitable terrain. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, and San Diego are not sprawling, shallow beaches, but deep waterports surrounded by difficult approaches. These locations are bottlenecks, narrow points where defenders, even with minimal resources, could block your progress by sinking a few strategic ships, destroying a handful of cranes, or demolishing key infrastructure. Suddenly, you find yourself stuck offloading tanks and heavy equipment onto rough beaches while taking fire from positions you cannot see. On the East Coast, the situation is no less difficult. Shallow waters, sprawling swamps, and dense urban populations turn every potential landing zone into a fight for survival the second your boats touch shore. New York, Boston, and other major cities are ideal terrain for defenders to melt into the concrete maze of streets, creating a scenario where every step forward costs dearly. It is at this point that the great irony of geography becomes clear, because the first line of defense of any nation is not its army, it is its land. The United States, by virtue of its size, its oceans, its mountains, its forests, and its deserts, is a fortress in every sense that matters. Geography here is not an obstacle, it is an active participant, a silent killer that humiliates invading armies long before they ever fire a shot. Imagine now that you recognize this challenge, and you make what you believe is a clever tactical shift. If the oceans are too vast and the direct sea landings are impractical, you will instead land in the neighboring countries of Canada or Mexico and drive your forces across the border. A sensible idea, perhaps, until you understand the nature of these neighbors. In the north, Canada is not a gentle plain leading into the heartland of the United States. Instead, it is dominated by the Canadian Shield, a geological formation consisting of millions of square miles of exposed ancient rock, frozen forests, swamps, and thousands of lakes. It is one of the harshest landscapes on Earth for mechanized warfare, with few roads capable of supporting heavy armor and little infrastructure capable of sustaining supply lines. If you land near Vancouver, you're immediately funneled into mountain corridors where narrow passes through the Cascade Mountains serve as perfect ambush sites and kill zones. Just a handful of defenders with explosives could destroy your supply columns in seconds. If your landing in Canada is further east, near Halifax or Montreal, you face a different but equally punishing obstacle: the Appalachian region and the forests of New England. During winter, these areas become wastelands of snow, ice, and frozen terrain. The same general winter that helped defend Russia from Napoleon and Hitler would greet your forces with icy cruelty, freezing supply lines, immobilizing vehicles, and turning even the most prepared army into a shivering and exhausted force floundering through snowdrifts. And remember, as your forces attempt to move south, you're not merely crossing terrain, you're occupying Canada itself, which is not likely to welcome your presence. Canadian civilians would be no less resistant than Americans. And with the difficult terrain at their backs, defending their homeland would be a logistical nightmare for your forces, even before reaching the U.S. border. Going south seems tempting, but Mexico is no easier. The deserts of the Sonoran and the Chihuahuan are not just stretches of hot sand. They are brutal environments that kill people who attempt to cross them on foot with nothing more than a backpack, let alone an army trudging heavy vehicles across miles of arid wasteland. Water is scarce, temperatures swing from blistering heat during the day to freezing cold at night, and the lack of reliable infrastructure means that supply lines buckle under their own weight before reaching their destination. Even where roads exist, the border itself presents a natural barrier. The Rio Grande, for example, acts as a moat for large stretches of the U.S. boundaries with Mexico. In many places, the terrain is rugged and unpaved, limiting the number of viable crossing points for armored vehicles. If you manage to cross, you are still hundreds of miles from major economic centers, dragging thousands of miles of supply lines behind you with minimal local infrastructure to support them. Trucks need fuel, water, spare parts, and food, none of which are readily available in the sparse towns of the Southwest. By this point, you may be thinking that geography is simply an unavoidable hurdle that once you overcome the oceans, the neighbors, and the deserts, the mainland will yield to your will. But this is where the true nature of the challenge reveals itself. Because once you land on American soil and push inland, you are greeted by not just land, but labyrinths of mountains and forests that act as natural kill zones. From the west coast, the mighty Rockies stretch like a great wall of stone and ice running from Canada all the way to New Mexico. These mountains are not mere elevations of land. They are vertical fortresses thousands of feet high, with narrow passes that act as funnels for invading forces, turning your columns into predictable lines of targets. If defenders decide to blow a tunnel, demolish a bridge, or block a canyon, you find entire divisions stuck in place, unable to advance or retreat. What was once a confident invasion force becomes a sitting target, surrounded by hostile terrain and unseen enemies who know every ridge and ravine. The Rockies are in many ways more difficult than the mountains encountered by the Soviets in Afghanistan, a conflict that ground their military to a halt. In Afghanistan, the terrain was rugged, but the population was sparse. In the Rockies, defenders can melt into forests, into valleys, into the very soil itself, exploiting every inch of vertical terrain. Suppose, in some wild fantasy of success, you avoid the Rockies and instead land on the East Coast. You capture major cities like Washington, New York, or Boston. You parade your banners through the streets and proclaim victory, believing that the hard part is over. But the hard part, as you will soon discover, has only just begun. From the East Coast, the Appalachian Mountains stretch like a living barrier from Alabama to Maine. These mountains are not as high as the Rockies, but they are thick with dense forests that seem to swallow sunlight and twist roads into endless coils. Armored vehicles, designed for open battlefields, become cumbersome and vulnerable here. Tanks bog down in mud. Supply trucks struggle up steep inclines, and air support becomes useless when the forest canopy blocks line of sight. Imagine a convoy winding through the valleys of West Virginia or Kentucky. Every road predictable, every bridge a potential trap, every tunnel a tomb. You cannot see your enemy, but they can see you. They know these woods, they grew up here. They understand how to use every creek and ridge to their advantage. This is close quarters fighting in its purest form, where local knowledge outweighs technological superiority. Even as you push deeper into the continent, the land itself continues to resist you. The Mississippi Basin, the girth of the nation's bloodline, flows like a vast waterway through the heartland, and its rivers carve the land in unpredictable ways. Bridges are everywhere, tens of thousands of them, and if defenders choose, they need only destroy key crossings to sever entire regions. The East and the West, once part of the same country, become islands cut off from each other. Urban centers, far from being easy prizes, become deadly traps. Cities like Chicago, Dallas, Atlanta, and Miami are sprawling concrete jungles, environments where every intersection becomes a potential ambush site. Every skyscraper a sniper's perch, every subway tunnel an underground battlefield. You're no longer fighting an organized army. You are fighting every neighborhood, every citizen, every family who has decided that their home is worth dying for. And this brings us to perhaps the most unpredictable element in this entire scenario, the people themselves. Strip away all the natural defenses, all the mountains, all the oceans, and the one thing that truly makes the United States unconquerable is the population, a collection of individuals with an identity forged in independence, resilience, and self-reliance. There is a phrase often attributed, perhaps apocryphally, to a Japanese admiral during World War II that you cannot invade the mainland United States because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. Whether he actually said it or not is irrelevant, because the math, the culture, and the sheer number of civilian-owned firearms in the country make the sentiment painfully real. There are hundreds of millions of civilian firearms in this nation, far more firearms than there are citizens, and they are not concentrated only in urban centers or rural enclaves. They are everywhere. Hunters, hobbyists, veterans, survivalists, and everyday citizens own guns of every type, from pistols to precision rifles capable of hitting targets at extreme distances. In one state alone, during deer hunting season, hundreds of thousands of hunters take to the woods with weapons in hand, practiced in marksmanship and stealth. Imagine scaling that up to a national scale, millions of civilians equipped with weapons, knowledge of the terrain, and the willingness to defend their homes. Your advanced tanks and armored vehicles, designed for battlefield engagements, suddenly encounter decentralized resistance that can appear from any direction, strike without warning, and disappear without trace. And it is not just civilian shooters. It is the millions of veterans living in the United States, individuals who have served in combat theaters across the globe, experienced in tactics, ambushes, improvised explosive devices, communications, and small unit maneuvers. They are not just amateurs, they are trained warriors who know how to fight asymmetrically, how to exploit vulnerabilities, how to make an occupying force pay dearly for every mile it gains. Imagine occupying a small town in Missouri. Your checkpoint is established, your soldiers think they are secure, and then suddenly a supply truck rolls over a pressure plate wired to an explosive hidden beneath the soil. A drone, purchased cheaply online and rigged with a payload, descends silently onto a command vehicle, detonating in a flash of fire. Snipers equipped with thermal optics open fire from unseen positions, forcing your troops to seek cover in places where bullets fly from every direction. You fire back, but they vanish into the woods, into the cornfields, into the suburban backyards, becoming ghosts that haunt your every movement. This is not a war where taking the capital means victory. The United States is not a monolith with a central government whose fall signals surrender. It is a federation of 50 states, each with its own identity, its own pride, its own population, and its own means of resisting. Capture Washington, and what happens? The governor of Texas does not kneel. They mobilize the state guard and declare independence. The governor of California does not surrender. They fortify the cities, and prepare to resist. You do not defeat one army. You face thousands of local militias, private security forces, civic volunteers, and hardened combat veterans all acting independently but united in purpose. To control a hostile population of 300 million people, you would need a policing force of millions of soldiers. Military doctrine suggests that to effectively pacify a hostile civilian population, you need roughly 20 soldiers for every 1,000 civilians. Do the math, and to occupy a nation of this size, you would need an occupation force in the millions, far larger than the active duty militaries of even the most populous nations on Earth. Simply put, you do not have enough humans to stand on every corner, watch every street, and guard every town. And as if all of this were not enough, the infrastructure of the United States itself, the network of roads, bridges, railways, pipelines, and communication systems that knit the country together, becomes a logistical black hole the moment you step onto the land. The interstate highway system, a marvel of engineering in times of peace, becomes a liability in times of war. Bridges become obstacles to be destroyed. Highways become predictable channels for ambush, and rail networks, privately owned and highly complex, can be immobilized with minimal sabotage. Freight trains thrown from their tracks, switching stations disabled, tunnels blocked, and suddenly entire regions grind to a halt. Fuel becomes scarce as refineries are targeted, pipelines are shut down, and distribution centers are blown up. Trucks, the workhorses of any modern logistics chain, sit idle with empty tanks, stranded on broken roads, while the land around them becomes a hostile maze. The further you push inland, the weaker your logistical foundation becomes, and the stronger and more confident the resistance grows because they are fighting on their own turf, close to their own supply stocks, and with the emotional fervor of defending their families and homes. Now imagine, after months of grinding battles, you have taken major cities, you control territory, and your forces are seemingly triumphant. At this moment, you have not won. You have triggered an economic catastrophe that reverberates far beyond the borders of the United States. The dollar, the primary reserve currency of the world, collapses, wiping out trillions of dollars of global wealth. Markets freeze, trade stops, banks fail, and the global economy falls into depression. Millions of citizens of other nations suffer, including your own, because the world's financial system is woven so deeply around the U.S. economy that its destruction triggers a chain reaction of bankruptcies, unemployment, and chaos. Technology systems, cloud networks, internet infrastructure, data centers that house the backbone of global communications are heavily concentrated on U.S. soil. Destroy them, and you do not just disrupt American Netflix streams. You bring down banking systems, satellite communications, logistical databases, medical records, and everything that keeps modern society functioning. And even if you somehow manage to seize these facilities, the smartest engineers, scientists, and tech experts will flee, taking encryption keys, source code, and operational knowledge with them. You conquer land, but you cannot capture the mind of the country. Finally, imagine trying to govern this sprawling entity once you have taken it. The United States is not one single machine with one master switch. It is a tapestry of 50 states, thousands of counties, hundreds of cities, each with its own laws, its own authorities, its own stubborn resistance to outsiders telling them what to do. There are sheriffs who answer only to local citizens, governors who command their own National Guard units, mayors who control emergency services, and a population that argues with its own government about parking tickets, taxes, zoning laws, and nearly everything under the sun. How do you think this same population will react when a foreign occupier tells them what to do? You will face sabotage, strikes, protests, civil disobedience, and logistical breakdowns on a scale that no army in history has ever seen. By the time you control the land, the economy, and the infrastructure, you are not in control of anything, because the cost has been not just military, but social, economic, political, and human. You find yourself in a negative sum game, where every gain is outweighed by an even greater loss, where every mile you hold drains your resources, your morale, and your political legitimacy. The longer you stay, the poorer you become, the weaker your nation becomes, and the stronger the resistance grows. So let's recap. Not as bullet points, because this is a story, a narrative of reality rather than a list, but as a series of brutal truths. To plan this invasion, you must first cross vast oceans of logistical hell. Then you must contend with neighboring countries whose terrain breaks your supply lines before you even reach the target. Once on the land, mountains and forests transform your columns into predictable channels for ambush, your convoys into easy prey. The people you aim to conquer become guerrillas with weapons, knowledge, and willpower that cannot be extinguished by conventional force. Your supply chains buckle under the strain of a continent built to frustrate mechanized armies, and even if by some miracle you seize cities, you trigger an economic collapse that destroys your own nation's wealth and infrastructure. Invading the United States, in this hypothetical scenario, is not just a military operation. It is a suicide note written in statistics, geography, human behavior, economic entanglement, and national identity. The country does not need a massive standing army to remain unconquered. Because the land itself, the people within it, and the systems that bind it together serve as defenses greater than any fortress wall ever built. The Atlantic and Pacific are the walls, the Rockies and the Appalachians are the towers, and the people, fiercely independent and armed, not just with weapons, but with the will to defend their homeland, are the garrison that never sleeps. To any aspiring superpower watching this deep dive into hypothetical chaos, do not do it, not because it would be morally wrong, not because international law forbids it, but because you will lose, and you will lose badly. This is the reality of American geography, economics, and human society. It is the ultimate cheat code in the game of civilization. If you enjoyed this exploration of hypothetical warfare, strategy, logistics, geography, and history, let me know what part surprised you the most and tell me in the comments where you think an invading force would struggle the hardest. Would it be the swamps of the southeast, the cold of Alaska, the deserts of the southwest, or perhaps the dense urban jungles found in the northeast? Leave your thoughts below because I will be reading them, and for those watching, thank you for staying with me through this journey into the impossible.